Hello and welcome to Newspeak. I'm Peter Whittle. Great to see you. And I'm joined, as usual, by Rafe Heydel-Mankoo, our senior fellow, who's actually been away for a while. Rafe, so you were in India?
Yes, went to revisit the Raj.
Yes.
It was a great time. Well, it was a great trip through, the Victorian Britain, actually. I always lament our best buildings. We didn't build in this country. We built our best buildings in India, so it was wonderful to actually go and see them. I was there for a wedding as well, which was quite remarkable.
Well, welcome back, because it's been a while, hasn't it? Amy Gallagher, of This Manor and Stand Up to Woke, and Dr. Philip Kiszely, other senior fellow and cultural historian. However, before we start talking about the events of this week, just an updated run through of some of the great NCF local events that are happening in the following weeks. So, Rafe, you've got a list for us, right?
Yes, so we have a full tranche of events happening over the course of the next month. So if you live in or near any of these following towns, please do send an email to locals@newcultureforum.org.uk. These are great informal events. They're free of charge. They're an opportunity to get together with like-minded spirits from your local area where you can speak candidly and freely and often get to hear great speakers as well. So here's the list. Pay attention. 19th of January will be in Carlisle. On the 21st of January in Salisbury, where we have a guest speaker, Byron Logue, who's chairman of the Salisbury Reform Branch. 22nd of January, North London. Then on the 23rd of January, we'll be in Canterbury, in Southend-on-Sea, where the guest speaker is Lois Perry, formerly of UKIP, who is now head of Climate Common Sense, and also in Beaconsfield, where we have David Moore and our very own Harrison Pitt speaking. On the 26th of January in Birmingham, 28th of January will be in Bath and Dorset and Liverpool. On the 29th of January in Southampton. We'll be in London, South London on the 30th of January, on the 4th of February in Sheffield, the 17th in Reading, the 19th in Brighton with Harrison Pitt as our speaker, and then we round out the month in Beaconsfield again on February the 20th with David Starkey speaking on constitutional matters. So do email locals@newcultureforum.org.uk to attend any of those.
Great stuff. I mean, what a panoply of events. I should add that when Rafe says quite informal, he means lounge suits. Okay, we're kidding. I'm kidding.
White tie, actually.
Yeah, standards are slim. Well, look, we're doing this on Saturday. On Monday, big event. Well, a number of different events, I might add. But let's start off with the kind of official political one, and that is the inauguration of Trump. Before we look forward to what that means and what we can expect, what do you make of the past, 4 years of Biden? I mean, how do you think he will be remembered, if at all?
Well, I think Biden's legacy will be the intermission between Trump 1 and Trump 2. It's a presidency that ends in catastrophic failure for him because he really thought he was going to be St. George, vanquishing the MAGA dragon. And instead of that, he has simply become a blip and also ran. And historians and kids in the future learning about this era in history, he will be a non-entity, simply the buffer between the two great, Trump presidencies. And that's quite remarkable, actually, because on many levels, he had a very good presidency. The first president ever to have more employment every single month of his term in office. President who got double the number of people signing up for health care. The American economy is actually going gangbusters. Everywhere else in the Western world is looking with envy at the strength of the American economy. Huge infrastructure investment program of $1 trillion. On the economic level, much was done. But of course, the Americans are very parochial, and the inflation of 5% to 9% that America experienced, even though it was a global phenomenon, they never forgave him for him. And of course, it was all overshadowed by his absence from the political sphere, and of course by his cack-handed handling of the withdrawal from Afghanistan, which came at the beginning of his term in office, and it really set his popularity plummeting and never recovered from that. He went from 57% approval rating now down to his lowest at 39%. Of course, many people on the left will never forgive him for actually not retiring early and giving somebody else a chance to go against Trump. But of course, the fact that Trump secured a bigger a voter turnout in the election than in the first time shows you, of course, that the cack-handed way in which the immigration issue was handled, the open door policy to illegals coming over, the amount of violence people have seen on the streets everywhere from San Francisco to New York, having no way in which they could actually deal with the Republican governors who channeled migrants to these safe sanctuary cities in the Democrat states. Quality of life across America, despite the economic stuff going so well, the quality of life visibly was deteriorating due to all of those sorts of pressures. Then you had the whiff of scandal over his business dealings and his son, Hunter Biden's, criminal charges against him, and the whiff and stink of corruption was never far away from Biden. And of course, people realized that they were being lied to by the Democrats for 4 years, keeping this man out of the public eye for so long, and people felt cheated about that. So I think it's a presidency that will end in shame and in regret.
I think one of the worst things was hearing a President Biden, in this case, saying the biggest problem we face at the moment in this country is white supremacy. And that was a president.
That was the president, yeah.
Saying that to his own country. Amy, to me, I relate him entirely with the woke craziness and indeed with Black Lives Matter. Yeah, remember that all happened, didn't it?
Yeah, all of that stuff. I think, to me, Biden's kind of gone out of my mind already. I still think of Kamala Harris, actually. And I think it's because even though he went along with all of that woke stuff, I think people felt very much that he wasn't in charge. We saw over the 4 years his mental state deteriorate. I think one of the things that sticks in my mind was him introducing Zelensky as Putin. And it got to the state, it got to the state where it was very obvious.
Sticks in Zelensky's mind as well, I think.
It's very obvious that he had dementia, and it was very obvious that he wasn't in charge. And I think even people who voted Democrat or who are left-leaning were saying, well, who actually is in charge now? And I think it became so apparent that the Democrats are a kind of machine rather than headed by a figure, that this man was not in charge. And for how long was he being fed lines? At what point was he no longer able to make decisions about what lines he was saying? So I think it just showed that the Democrats and the left in America were just totally corrupted and willing to do whatever it took to stay in power. And that was what was kind of revealed, I think, over those 4 years. And Biden will be forgotten.
It's just a kind of footnote.
Yeah.
But a footnote, interestingly, at one of the most important times in US life, actually.
Yeah, culturally he's been an absolute disaster. And I've just been reading about his goodbye speech, and he talks about disinformation. Now, this is the man who said, quite literally, if you vote Republican, then you ain't black. So it's so ludicrous. Yes, he's been a slight interruption between Trump 1 and Trump 2. But I think more than that, he just has no identity. It's almost as though the identity that he does have is projected on him from other people. And I often think about the film Being There with Peter Sellers. If viewers have seen that, Chancy Gardner, who has like no personality, and all of his personality is projected, as I say. And I always think of Biden in that particular way. Even with this final speech that he's made, he's kind of paraphrasing Eisenhower in terms of talking about oligarchy and military supremacy. Well, he's actually talking about tech supremacy, but he's paraphrasing Eisenhower. And you think that doesn't come across as being clever or historically informed. It just comes across as being borrowed. And I think that really sums up for me what he was about. And of course, seeing him and seeing the final couple of years, it was actually painful to watch, because this man was, senile, for want of a better word. He was mentally impaired. He was physically impaired as well, and it was almost as though they were pushing him out front, and it was almost like abuse. So it was very difficult to see all of that, and it felt as though, yes, we're just waiting for Trump to come back, and I think that sums up precisely what he is.
Yes, to me, this whole situation reminds me rather of Carter and Reagan.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, there are similarities between Carter and Biden. You know, do you remember? I mean, do you remember? Is this what 1979, 80, and America had become this kind of very passive, you know, troubled nation, which in some ways, you know, was seen in the president himself. He was this kind of very sort of languid, weak character. Carter, who's just recently died, of course.
It felt like at that time it was the end of an era, and because it wasn't only Carter, it was Callahan as well in this country, and it felt like with Thatcher and Reagan there was something new and something exciting happening. With Trump coming back, with the organisation he's got, with the administration he's got, it feels as though something exciting is happening now. And I just hope that this Labour government goes and something exciting takes its place very soon.
You know that you mentioned there about this sort of Democrat machine and who was in control. It seems, I mean, many people just think it's Obama, right? This isn't some conspiracy theory, but just that the Obamas and that kind of cabal in the Democrat Party are in charge. But when people say, oh, it was, you know, that he was obviously senile and had dementia and all of these things, wasn't it clear to us from the very start that the guy was impaired? I mean, but it's sort of during the election, people were sort of behaving as though this was sort of, oh my goodness, suddenly the veil has been lifted and we see this man for what he is. It was obvious, wasn't it, that he wasn't.
It was clear. It just became painful.
They kept deflecting. They kept saying, you know, Trump's pathological and Trump's unwell and Trump's got problems. But it was, to us, it was, you know, obvious from the beginning. And they kept up this lie for so long. And then it wasn't until it was the election rally, wasn't it, when he spoke? And then it was like they just flipped. They just went, they suddenly...
It was the presidential debate.
Yeah, presidential debate. Everybody just said, I think they just reached a point where they thought, we actually are going to lose with Biden. So because we're going to lose, we'll suddenly be open about the fact that he's senile. And I think that just characterised his whole presidency, that it was just lots of lies and propaganda all the way through, from COVID to gender ideology and all sorts of things, that everybody was just being fed lies. And it was so obvious that they wasn't even attempting to hide it.
You know, as Trump comes in, some people are saying in America, I think it was Rod Liddell actually wrote a piece about it, that there is more acceptance, as kind of a change of attitude towards Trump. Is it something that you feel see here, do you think, or not, Rafe?
Yeah, well, I think everyone firstly has to come to terms with the Trump presidency because they have to deal with him. So you've even had the amazing scene of, you know, MSNBC, which is, you know, to the left of Channel 4 over here, sending plenipotentiaries to meet with Trump at Mar-a-Lago. And that in itself tells you something about how you're seeing America changing. Mark Zuckerberg, head of Meta, Facebook, now getting rid of fact checkers and actually coming out with a lot of things that sound rather Muskian in terms of his policies there. Bezos as well from Amazon. You're seeing everybody move because they realize not only do we have to deal with this man, this is a man who won the popular vote. You've seen, of course, in America, the beginnings of all of this with places like McDonald's getting rid of DEI stuff, Harley Davidson and others. There is a sea change, and we can attribute a great amount of it to the work of Trump and his coterie. People are, and in this country, you know full well that David Lammy and Keir Starmer do not want to deal with this man. However, they understand that they have to bite their tongue. And indeed, you know, the Overton window over here is moving as well because of Trump. You know, there's a tsunami coming over the Atlantic from America.
Actually, a lot of people that I know about you are going. I mean, they're going to the inauguration. This is a really big sort of deal. I do hope, I mean, what they must do, if you remember last time when he was inaugurated, they made a big fuss about the fact that there was a kind of rather sparse crowd. And he seemed to say, what? You know, we had the biggest crowd. They're obviously got to revisit that, that's for sure. Yes, it seems to me that he's slightly different anyway, isn't he, Trump?
He's become a symbol, hasn't he, in a way? He's become a symbol of the fight in a way that he wasn't before. He was Trump, he was himself, he was this ex-businessman, he was larger than life, he was a reality TV star. He isn't that now. He's become something, he's become incredibly powerful. It's part of, as I've said before, how he deals with social media and how he deals with the other side, or I should say the enemy. He's brilliant at it, or the people who do it for him are brilliant at it. And I think there's something different now in the sense that there's an organization there, and he's linked with people like Elon Musk, who are all of a sudden, well, not all of a sudden, but very clearly and publicly on our side. And there's a momentum, there's a dynamism there, and he is the figurehead. Trump is the figurehead. It's not just in terms of those broad cultural things, it's very specific things. It feels like culturally masculinity is back on the agenda again.
Yes.
We don't have to apologize for anything because he would never apologize for anything. And in lots of ways, that's very exciting.
Apparently one of the symptoms of this change, the word retard is now okay to use.
Never heard of that, no.
Have you heard about it?
I've never stopped using it.
About dude.
But it's a very good point that Philip makes, because he did not expect to win that presidency. He was as stunned as everybody else was, and you could see that on his face when he won. He didn't have a team in place. The people he did bring in place, John Bolton and all these characters, ended up loathing him. They weren't true Trumpians. Now at least the team is there. There are 3,000 appointments. It's a very big cabinet and a very big number of appointments that are made. That team is actually there. They're in place. They're being vetted now. And if you look at the committee hearings in Congress of some of these candidates, like Pete Hegseth, the potential defense secretary, the quality there is amazing. But they're all on side. They're all signed up to the MAGA platform in a way that his previous administration wasn't. That's why we're all expecting great things. And someone like, I was watching Pete Hegseth, rebutting all these Democrat Republicans during his hearings this week. If we had just 1/10 of the cabinet full of that type of character here, we'd be in a much better place. The intelligence, the coolness under pressure, and the real grasp of the issues at stake in terms of the culture wars and so forth in the army, getting rid of DEI, not having quotas, not making standards lower to accommodate women and so forth, and being unashamed to say that. Nobody in this country would have the balls to say any of the stuff that I've heard this week coming out of his mouth.
Well, apparently, isn't it right that Keir Starmer, our Prime Minister, has not been invited? Is that right? I find that extraordinary.
No Prime Minister's ever been invited. So there's a bit of, we need to do some fact checking on that claim as well. So
BBC verified.
No Prime Minister has been invited, so there's no reason that Keir Starmer would have been invited. Churchill happened to be in the country at the same time, but he actually wasn't invited either back in 1951.
I think Thatcher went.
But I don't think she was formally invited.
No, she didn't go.
She went there. So there's never been now, Trump has invited, we understand, some people, like I think Orban got an invitation and Maloney may have. But the fact is there is no precedent for inviting the British Prime Minister. And remember, of course, he's only a head of government. He's not the head of state either.
He sort of seems, as far as one can tell, different in the sense of his style is different, Amy, isn't it? He's not going out of his way to be class or anything, but also he just feels more. Well, first of all, he looks different. He's lost a lot of weight, but he seems more kind of at ease.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at his recent inauguration photo and compare it to the first one, the second one, he looks like a man who's been, he's kind of fierce. He's very steely-eyed. He looks more determined. He's taking it more seriously, I think. I think, as Ray said, if he wasn't really expecting to win the first time round, and none of us really knew how serious he would be and how he was and how he would perform. But he went through this assassination attempt, and I think that's changed him profoundly. Yeah. And the fact that he just went straight into carrying on and continuing to be a leader. And obviously, this is the last 4 years he will have, so he's not going to. He doesn't need to think about winning the next election. So I think he is calmer. I think he's more experienced. He's probably wiser. And he's got this great team of men around him now, very highly competent men. He's got the backing of big players. And we just have to hope that they all get along, because there's lots of egos there. And there's some early signs that there's a bit of conflict with kind of the visa debate and so on. So we just have to hope that they can all put their egos to the side and do what's best for America.
I think, I don't know, I was going to ask you what would be something that you would particularly like to see quite quickly. I'll just give my 2 pence. It's actually more one of the minor things. but he announced, did he not, recently or just before Christmas, the creation of what he calls the American Academy. If you were trying to find a kind of example of what that would be, it sounded rather to me like the Open University, but it was the most wonderful way of circumventing this absolutely rotting educational establishment with all its identity politics. Well, and this was going to be something. Your degree will stand with anyone else's degree. I think it's called the American Academy. Look it up. And it's going to be all online. And I just think this is the kind of thinking we need here.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, if you were going to ask me that question, I would say for him to tackle the universities, tackle the intellectual life in America, and take away funding from the gender stuff, from the Hammer stuff, from all of the stuff that is undermining Western culture, which he's doing, and it's not only a negative. He's not only destroying, he's creating something new as well, which is fantastic. And I think actually that's one of the key differences between Trump then and Trump now. And we see that because he's surrounded. It isn't just the inner circle. It isn't just his team. He's surrounding himself by the correct intellectuals. I mean, we saw Douglas Murray, who's a friend to us all here, chatting with him at Mar-a-Lago, and all of that kind of the intellectual life, the public intellectual life, which has always been the domain of the left and the radical left, now seems to be the domain of the centre-right.
Let's hope. What about you?
I'm quite looking forward to seeing Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk's Doge, which is the Department of Government Efficiency department, which is actually they're going to strip away all of the unnecessary government bodies and quangos and so on, a bit like Milei has done in Argentina, that they're just going to get rid of lots of stuff that's not needed, kind of the deep state, kind of civil service type stuff. I think that's amazing, and I think we definitely need that here.
Of course, remember as well, it's one of the particulars of the American system that they essentially bring in their own civil service when they come in, albeit maybe the top part of that civil service. Rafe, what are you looking forward to?
Mass deportations. I want him to set
This is reliable.
His borders are, Homan said, we're going to embark on the biggest policy of mass deportations in history. I want to hold him to that. And, Trump has used the word remigration at least once. I want him to start using remigration more and getting this, because whatever happens there eventually happens over here too. And so it's happening in Europe, we need people in the Anglosphere to start using this term to get it much more in common parlance so that we can move the discussion in this country as well.
What are we talking about when it comes to deportations? First of all, of illegals in America. Isn't it right we're talking about 13 million or something?
The total number, I'm not sure, but it's in the millions.
A phenomenal number. Here we don't quite know, but people think it's over a million. Whenever they say that means it's probably more like 1.5 million, or 2 million.
Bearing in mind, we've got no idea how many people are in the country. It could be a number.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, I will certainly be watching. I'm sure you maybe will too, or mind it. In the meantime, we are filming this on a Thursday. Just before we came on air, it was became clear from the Home Secretary Yvette Cooper that there was not going to be, or she did not announce, a national inquiry into, can I say, rape gangs, or are we going to be done by the algorithm? I don't know. Grooming gangs. You know what I'm talking about. Instead of which she talks about sort of local inquiries. Do you sense, Amy, that this is being kicked into the long grass already? I mean, we talked about this last week, and we talked about it the week before, and somehow the subject is kind of going off the vine.
Yeah, well, I think this is maybe in response to there's been a few Labour MPs, most notably Andy Burnham, that have said that there needs to be a national inquiry. So maybe they're responding to that. They feel like they've got to do something. I mean, you've got to remember Keir Starmer not too long ago accused anyone of raising this issue as jumping on the bandwagon of the far right. So I don't know if Yvette Cooper is herself doing that by, presenting this suddenly. But to me, it's just the worst of all scenarios, really. It's giving us something, but in a way that will mute the conversation, I think. When it was first, the consideration of a national inquiry was first being considered, I was a bit sceptical about it. I remember someone, I can't remember who it was, but had the idea that if we were going to do a national inquiry, because there was so much corruption at every level, it would only be beneficial for us to have someone external coming into the UK, like almost an international body conducting the inquiry. Because there's so much bias and there's so much corruption. How could it be beneficial? But this, to me, what she suggested is even worse, because we know that most of this corruption happened at the local level. It was police, it was councillors, it was social workers, everybody. There's so many people that could, come a cropper in this kind of potential investigation, that you wonder, how is it possible for it to be conducted in an unbiased way?
It's impossible.
Well, it's impossible. So what is the point of it? It's going to cost a lot of money, and it won't. What's going to happen? I mean, that was the reason that people got so angry at Jess Phillips, because Oldham Council were looking to her to help them, and she kicked it back to them and said, no, you need to do your own inquiry. And everybody said, well, this is like marking your own homework, because these are the very people that are the problem. So I don't know what these kind of local inquiries are going to look like, but to me it just feels it's very deflating and disheartening.
Yeah, it's essentially a PR exercise, isn't it? It's a damage limitation exercise, and I don't think anybody has any. That's precisely what it is. They're talking about 5 places, aren't they? They're including Oldham at this stage. 5 places. This is 50 towns and cities, and there are 250,000 children who've been abused here. There are over 1,400 in Rotherham alone. Okay. And so they're just allocating £10 million to this, which is nothing in the overall scheme of
When it says they are allocated, what does that mean?
the government they're going to spend £10 million on the 5 reviews. Okay. So it's nothing. It's worse than it is quite literally, as Amy says, worse than doing nothing at all. It just feels as though these children who've been terribly abused, and if anybody's read the transcripts, you know what I mean.
You should.
That.
People should.
You should. Are just being thrown under the bus. But to take one of these places in isolation is to ignore the wholesale nature of the whole thing. And it's the connectivity, it's the cultural connectivity across the country that we really need to be looking at. It's these towns which are lost to multiculturalism, which are laws unto themselves, that really need to be put under the microscope. And you cannot do that if you're taking one place and you're talking about one particular thing in isolation and you don't talk about anything else.
One thing that's interesting about this, you talk about the sheer scale of it, is that a couple of people have asked, London doesn't figure. Now, I have no data at all. I think the question was asked to Sadiq Khan by the Tories actually this week or maybe the week before. My hunch is that there is no white working class anymore to speak of. What do you think?
That's probably one of the main reasons why it's not happening. I'd also say that some of the demographics are different. In the north of England, you have Mirpuri Pakistanis in a much higher concentration in the north than you do in London, where you have a much larger Bangladeshi community, where the incidents aren't quite as high, not anywhere near as high as it is within the Pakistani community. So there are some of those factors that also play into this. But look, we're being fobbed off, right? This is another attempt to cover up. On the positive side, they do have Dame Louise Casey, who is, I would say, one of the few people who actually is qualified to do this sort of a thing, doing a 3-month audit on the evidence. But that's not a national inquiry. She's just a very rapid thing. She did an excellent study into segregation in this country, and it was very hard-hitting, and many uncomfortable truths were in it. The Home Secretary says we do need to understand more about ethnicity data on this, which is something good, but I can't help but think they're going to look at paedophilia more broadly and then try to do the old trope about more white people being involved. And that brings you on to one of the arguments against having the national inquiry that you often hear. Oh, well, we've had the Baroness J report. You often hear this. We had the J report from 2015 to 2022. We just need to get on with it and do those recommendations. People need to understand the J report into child sexual exploitation dealt with the broadest possible terms. It was looking at the Catholic Church. It was looking at residential institutions. It was looking at the Church of England. Grooming gangs were just and were a tangential issue that became overshadowed by the whole thing.
I think Rotherham was mentioned once.
Exactly.
In over 400.
And so the J thing was very useful and worthwhile in its own thing, but this is an entirely separate thing, the grooming gangs thing, and it needs its own analysis because it has unique factors involved with it, and we have not had the inquiry, and anything else but a national inquiry is simply yet another scandal in what is the greatest scandal of the century.
If we had a national inquiry, it would have to be one, would it not, that has absolute specific time on it, so 6 months maybe, or 9 months, and it should have the ability to prosecute, or should I say subpoena.
Yes, so local inquiries don't. You can't compel people to attend. In a national inquiry, you can call on people to attend. But crucially, this mustn't just be an investigation into the actual perpetrators of these crimes. This must be into all of those who aided and abetted it, because their hands are steeped in blood for all of this. They should lose their jobs, they should lose their pensions, and they should go to prison for what they've done. And unfortunately, not enough attention is being given to those who basically, for the interest of community cohesion, allowed and facilitated the industrial scale rape of young girls. I'm talking about the police, the councils, and social services.
And also, if this sort of thing should maybe happen organically, but maybe it won't, you've actually got to look in how ideology played a part in this, and that this was all about upholding a narrative. That was the whole thing. It was about upholding the narrative of multiculturalism. You know?
This was essentially diversity as our strength.
Yes.
In the face of the most grotesque, racially motivated, violent sex crime towards children. I mean, there are some details which are just too harrowing to even think about, let alone talk about. But you can say things like, for example, one child was getting raped upstairs in a kebab house, and downstairs the rapist's uncle, brothers and cousins were downstairs waiting their turn. So this is a kind of warfare. This is a kind of war crime in a way. This is the kind of thing that you would have expected to see in Serbia in the 1990s or something like that. But it's here. It's in these northern towns. It's right across Britain, and we've got to ask ourselves how the hell it got here, and actually what are we going to do about it? And a national inquiry, subpoenas, and jail time is the absolute solution.
I think this is the point, is when you sort of say we've got to ask these questions. Of course we have. If you think about it, Stephen Lawrence has been used as a stick to beat us with for about 30 years. No one is saying what happened to him was not terrible. No one's saying that. But every possible analysis about what this says about British society, every possible memorial, every possible ennoblement that has happened as a result of that, it pales into insignificance when you look at what has happened to these girls, right? We can't let that go, can we?
No.
No, if this inquiry was going to be serious, it would have to look at the role of racism from these Pakistani men towards white girls, and part of their belief systems, their Islamic belief systems, what they are being taught in mosques and in their communities about white girls and how you should view them and how you can approach them and how you view them differently to Muslim girls and so on. But that, we know that can never happen. There's already people in the media class coming out saying that the fact that people are naming this as Pakistani rape gangs is racist. Nobody says it's racist when you say, all of Stephen Lawrence's murderers were white. Why is it wrong to point out the race of the perpetrators when the crime, there's the potential for it to be racist? And there's overwhelming evidence that this was racist. You just look at the transcripts. They were shouting in court that they are the supreme race, calling white girls all sorts of racist slurs and names. This is the biggest example of racism we've ever seen, I think. And there should be, the inquiry should lead with that. If we go on and on and on about systemic racism, and this is the biggest example, and to me, this is where the inquiry should be.
Yeah. The biggest example of a racist crime. At the same time that this country has been battered and battered by accusations of systemic racism, as you say, it's like, to use a trivial term, monumental gaslighting.
Yes, it is.
And talking about gaslighting, it's not just what people say, it's not just how people defend, it's what people don't say as well. So if you go back to George Floyd, for example, the immediate aftermath of that was universities putting out these ridiculous statements saying, we are institutionally racist. People were getting down on their hands and knees, taking the knee in Zoom meetings and in tears about the inherent racism in this country. This is a criminal in America. Not one university that I'm aware of has put out a statement, in solidarity with the children who've been systemically raped for the last 30 years by gangs of Pakistani men. Yeah. This is the really deep problem that we have to deal with. It's the institutions, it's the media class, it's the government class who just will not face this at all and will do anything to push it under the carpet. And as we've seen with this local inquiry, so what?
Yeah. I think interesting on this point as well, I tweeted about this and got quite a big response. Where are the great celebrities?
Yeah.
Where is the concert for the victims of grooming gangs? Where is this and that and the other?
Where are the protests or the riots?
It's the same thing. It's the same.
We've had protests in London every weekend for ages over Palestine, Israel, and we haven't seen. I think that people are starting to want to protest for this, but for years there was nothing.
And well, you get one black person gets shot, and you have, of course, everything we've seen. But we've seen what happens when you do try to mobilize and protest. It gets slurred as being far-right fascists.
The other thing about this is almost no kind of response or protest from the wider Muslim community. I think there's been maybe one statement, small statement, but there's been nothing like the outrage when you consider the enormity of this. Nothing. What's the point? It's not expected. People are not saying, where is it?
No.
It's sort of not expected. And I think your average lefty would say, why should they? Why should they?
Yeah,
why should they do that? I think it's just appalling. And I think, as I say, when it comes to sort of, your average, say, like celebrities or whatever, when I put that tweet out, some people took it seriously and said we should. In fact, they've been engaging with me since. How can we do this? How can we actually get together something for the victims of the grooming gangs? Now, think about it. It's just worth floating this idea, isn't it? What could actually one do? I'd be very interested in ideas.
There is the Maggie Oliver Foundation, which has a GoFundMe fundraiser, which was set up by her, and I think also with Patrick Christie involved with it, to raise money for the victims of rape gangs. So that's one sort of thing that is currently existing.
But I think a very visible.
There was some talk.
Visible thing.
Yeah, there's some talk in the Reform Party of putting up a monument or a mural for the grooming gang victims in Westminster, I think
it's a very good idea. It could easily say, these things are important.
For it not to be
symbolically important, aren't they? There's one to the people who died. I walk past it all the time in the Bali terrorist attack. Quite a nice memorial. We should have something to these guys.
But one also for the mad cow disease, if you remember, as well, for people victims of that too.
Yes, exactly. Anyway, obviously, during this whole period, what has our wonderful Prime Minister been doing? Talking a lot about how we can, take the lead in the AI revolution. Totally and utterly irrelevant to most people. But also, there's been something as well, hasn't there, Philip? This is to do with Gerry Adams of Sinn Féin, which is pretty loathsome, isn't it?
This is a really horrible story, and it's multifaceted as well. So initially, it's about Keir Starmer trying to pull apart the Troubles legislation, which will enable Gerry Adams and something like 400 other IRA-related people to be able to claim compensation for being interned in the 1970s. Now, they were interned in the 1970s because they were a danger to Britain. They were, aligned with the IRA. That's bad enough, okay, and it's bad enough coming now. But it's also related to this, the Attorney General, Richard Hermer, who was parachuted in as one of Keir Starmer's cronies. He had already represented Gerry Adams in 2023. So all of a sudden it gets really messy. All of a sudden we're talking about human rights. He said he's a human rights lawyer. Keir Starmer's an ex-human rights lawyer. All of a sudden they're calling on the 1998 Human Rights Act to kind of give these, terrorist affiliated people rights that the British taxpayer is going to have to pay out for them, and he's defended. He defended Gerry Adams in 2023. But not only that, this man Richard Hermer, if you don't know who he is, check him out. Okay, he was the one who advised Keir Starmer to come down heavy on the protesters in summer, the people who were outraged by what had happened in Southport and protested. He was the one who said they were far right. He was the one who said they were keyboard warriors and they would feel the full force of the law. So all of this stuff was pretty much down to him. Okay, he was Attorney General. He is Attorney General. And what we've got now is this horrible situation in which not only Gerry Adams, who was called in the House of Lords the godfather of terrorism in this country, not only Gerry Adams, but potentially 400 other people as well will be compensated by the British taxpayer.
Gerry Adams has always denied any involvement with the IRA. However, there have been a number of politicians, there have been a number of journalists, investigative journalists, who have presented enough evidence for many people to actually wonder whether he is telling the truth on that, even though he has said what he said. There's a number of reports of describing him as a cold-blooded enforcer of IRA policy, setting up units and so forth as well. And that's all been printed and published in newspapers, easy to see and find. He was detained legally under legislation of the time. It's only subsequent to that, because of Labour's Human Rights Act, but the Supreme Court has said, well, under the terms of the Human Rights Act and the European Court, he was not lawfully detained. Now, the Tory government quite rightly passed legislation in 2023 to deliberately overturn the Supreme Court's decision and say, well, we don't need to take any notice of that because Parliament is supreme. But again, this government, and to the Tories' shame, they never got rid of the Human Rights Act, which they should have, because we wouldn't be in this situation had they done that. The Labour Party is acting because an Irish court in Belfast, a Northern Irish court, said that this compensation should be paid. They're not compelled to go with it. They could challenge it if they wanted to. They could pass legislation. They could keep the legislation in place that's currently there. This is entirely a situation of their making, and it stinks to high heaven. I was invited to give a speech in Belfast 2 months ago, and one of the organisers was a member of the special branch of the Royal Ulster Constabulary, and he took me around for 3 hours where all the troubles were, down the Falls Road, down the Shankill Road, where he was shot, where his partners were murdered, where his car was blown up, where he showed me where snipers were shooting and killing police officers. The RUC was the world's deadliest police force, had the highest death rate of any police force in the world, hundreds of them murdered. To think that those people and the civilians now, their tax money is going to go to compensate one of the people who stood for us. He wants to portray himself as a sort of an Irish Nelson Mandela. I'm sorry, this is a very nasty individual, whether or not he was involved with the IRA.
And there's also something else to bear in mind as well. The victims, the families of the victims of the IRA are getting no similar kind of compensation at all. It's people who are connected with terrorism and connected with anti-Britishness.
Yeah, this is the issue of all of these human rights laws that's becoming more and more into sharper focus. Each time you see some kind of injustice happen, we always see that it's connected to human rights laws. I think it was the judge last year that said this particular act, the Legacy Act, that meant that the government didn't have to pay compensation, went against people's human rights. And obviously we've got a Prime Minister who's a human rights lawyer. And more, there was a story recently, a separate story, about a Jamaican man who had committed rape in this country, was about to be be deported, and then he used human rights legislation to claim that his bisexuality meant that he would be unsafe in Jamaica, and that's what stopped him from being deported. We see how these human rights laws, they benefit terrorists, they benefit criminals, asylum seekers, and what's never taken into account is the human rights of the victims of IRA, the victims of this perpetrator's potential future rape victims, the victims of the grooming gangs. Their human rights never come into the conversation. It only ever goes one way, and that is the massive problem of so many things in our society. And it's Keir Starmer who favours all of this, because it's his, it's where he comes from, it's what he knows, and he wants to be seen to be in keeping with what these judges and these human rights lawyers think, because he is of that group, that's his tribe.
It's almost as though, if we think about what the vast majority of ordinary people, what they think, and we think about how the government acts, it's almost like we've got an occupying power. It's almost like Vichy France or something like that. They are constantly acting against British interests. They're acting against the general public. And you can feel the anger boiling. It's grooming gangs, it's the IRA, it's all of these terrible things that over the last 50 years have been a cancer at the heart of British society, British culture. And yet here they are facilitating, hiding, frustrating all of these things.
Yeah, and you don't get the sense that Keir Starmer or the Labour Party, they're aware of the optics of all of this. I think it was in Parliament, Keir Starmer came out and said, he kind of realised what this meant, and he sort of said something like, we'll make sure Gerry Adams isn't compensated. And it's like, well, it's not going to work like that, is it? Because the law says that everyone's entitled to compensation. That will include Gerry Adams. But it's almost like he's realised what the headline will be. And they don't, I think Keir Starmer and other members of the Labour Party, they act in a very procedural way. I mean, Kevin Badenoch was right to say that he is acting like a lawyer and not like a leader. The afterthought is, how will this look to the general public, and how as a politician should I spin this? But he's governing like a lawyer, and not a good lawyer, a lefty lawyer.
Well, look, I mean, winding up now, we're actually going to go on a little bit for our members, just carry on the conversation a bit. But before we do, we've obviously got the inauguration on Monday. However, there are also a few other important things happening on Monday, aren't there? Has anyone remembered? No,
what's that?
Actually, we've got the trial beginning of this guy, Axel Rudikebot.
Yes.
This is a Southall.
Well, that's another.
And then on the same day as the inauguration, as well as the man who basically nearly killed a soldier in Aldershot, if you remember, he's also going on trial. And indeed is the Labour protester who talked about slitting someone's throats or whatever.
Yes.
He's also
What a coincidence.
on the 20th.
What a coincidence.
Right? When the media's, not that they need distracting, but they will be looking elsewhere. Anyway, we will certainly be covering what happens on those days, actually. Thanks so much for watching. Philip, thank you very much. Amy, Rafe, and we shall see you next time. Bye.
Hello. If you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.